Alright, we got a background game to watch, and today we're going to talk about predictions using ratings. Do the rating systems I've been using actually perform well predictively? And so I'm going to be using ELO ratings, which are a very common rating system. Obviously, I've talked about it a lot, but very briefly, it is used for most online competitive games for matchmaking. Usually, they have some variation of ELO under the surface for their ratings to pair people with people of similar strength. Sometimes there's also variations called Glyco. It's the same general concept. The idea is you beat someone, you gain rating. You lose to someone, you lose rating. But you gain more the higher rating a person you beat. You lose more if you lose to a lower rated person. You lose less if you lose to a higher rated person. It's a good system. It does take a while to stabilize. So I have a bunch of ELO ratings running around, but I have a general one which I am applying to every single open tournament. So I have a lot more results for it than I do for my other ELO ratings, because it's the one where just any open tournament right now I am including in it. And what I wanted to do was check two different ways. How well does it predict actual results, right? So different things going on. There are a few different things going on. I am taking, this is a rating I also took from prior ratings from tournament performance before the return of the site. So everyone has a prior. And that means I can start checking results from the very first tournaments that were played rather than having to wait a bit for people's ratings to move to about where they should be. Because if everyone is assumed to be the same at the start of the return, obviously it's going to have some weird results that aren't actually what it would predict if it had a better sense of those players. So by having these prior ratings, it can predict from the very first, chat tournament back. Second of all, I want to check it. How is it doing on predictions, right? So if it says so-and-so is a 55% favorite and they win, does that mean it should have said they were an 100% favorite and their opponent was 0% to win? No, we want it to be predicting something so that if we take all the 55% predictions over time, about 55% of those win and about 45% lose. And so what I did was I divided it into buckets. So we have every matchup that I defined that it spat out, someone is 90 to 100% to win. Every matchup 80 to 90, every matchup that's 70 to 80, everyone that's 60 to 70, and everyone that is 50 to 60. Now, this means you might think, what about someone who's 35%? Well, if they're 35%, their opponent is going to be 65%, so that's going to go in the 60 to 70 bucket. And the useful point of buckets is to get a bigger sample of games in a category and be able to say, okay, here's all the games where it said someone was 50 to 60% favorite. That side should win, say about 55%. If you actually do normal distributions, it'll be a little different than that. But let's say 55% is a reasonable assumption. And if actually those players won 93%, that would say this is a terrible, terrible system. If those players won 40%, then it's not identifying favorites very well. And so the question is, how well is it actually predicting matchups, right? If the people I say should win 55% actually win 100%, something wrong is going on, right? So I want each bucket. Okay, well, this was not the greatest game to watch. Let's see if we can find another. Ooh, that's a more fun one. Shame it's closed. So by these buckets, we can get a big sample within a bucket and see, is the win percentage of the bucket what I would have predicted it to be? And so those are kind of the things I'm doing. I want to make two caveats, which made me have assumptions that, spoilers, turned out to be correct, though I wouldn't have known how largely so. But there are two weird things going on. One is ELO ratings do take a little bit to catch up. And so it could be the case that the gaps between players take a while to be achieved, and the gaps are bigger than ELO ratings realize, because they don't have enough games to fully realize those gaps. Similarly, because most tournaments run are elimination, the best players, the players we're looking at, the Turds, the Delials, are going to play a lot more games than even pretty good players that are going like 50%, because the 50% player is regularly playing 2 rounds. And, Delial or Turds might be playing 3 or 4 rounds each tournament. So they're going to have a much bigger sample of games from which to accurately rate them. And players who are going 50% or less, and it's really easy to go 50% or less in an elimination format. 3/4 of the players in any given tournament, by definition, will go 50% or less in an elimination tournament. So most players will have smaller samples of games to draw from, and it may do a poor job of differentiating between them. One other issue, is that I'm a moron, and I decided on the return for this specific rating system, no idea why I only did it for this one and not the others. I wanted what it would think is an 100% chance to win be a 600-point rating gap rather than what it was in the prior and in my other systems of 400. And that means the ratings came in thinking that, a 400-point gap is the kind of key enormous gap, and suddenly I changed it to 600. So the ratings are going to be a little closer than they should be because they're on that 400-point system rather than the 600-point one. You don't have to understand the details. It's really unimportant. The important thing is I did a stupid for no discernible reason, and it meant that ratings are going to be a little closer than they should be, which means it will think matchups are closer than they are. Again, all my fault. So we should expect, if it thinks it's 50 to 60% matchup, we might say we should expect 55%. We should expect a little higher than that entirely because I'm a moron. So let's get to the results. I put in basically every chat tournament. I put in Tezuka's Halloween Hand tournament. I put in the Clan tournament. I'm recording this at the start of March. I haven't yet put in Clan League. I put in Nephilim. I put in all kinds of results, like all the open results we have basically, except the last month of Clan League and whatever's happened since March 1st when I'm recording this. And I had my 5 buckets, and I compared what is the expected win percentage for each bucket and what is the actual win percentage. So I think I want to start with the 50 to 60% bucket. This bucket we'd expect. So this is, it predicted that someone was a 50 to 60% favorite. And thus we'd expect maybe 55% win rate over time. We have 130 some games in this sample, so we have a really decent sized sample in this bucket. We'd expect 55%. Now we might adjust that, again, because of my stupid rating thing, that maybe it would be more like 57%. And in actuality, it's 59.5%. That's pretty close. You could argue that's a decent amount off, because if you look the distance from 50%, 59.5% is almost twice as far from 50% as 55% is. But I think once you include that I messed up the rating system, so the expectation should be more like 57, 58, and it's 59.5, maybe it is slightly underrating the advantage of slight favorites, but it's pretty close. I feel pretty good about this, and I think over time, as the ratings adjust towards the 600 system rather than the 400, this is a pretty good indication that it is correctly identifying people who are slight favorites and assigning them about the right odds to win, right? That if it says someone is 55% favorite, there's a decent chance that they are somewhere around there. And they might actually be 60%, maybe it's even, but it's going to be in that vicinity, I think. And so I feel pretty good about this first number, which leads us to a number I feel a lot worse about. In the 60 to 70% bucket, so we might expect this bucket to end up with about a 65% win rate. We have over 100 games in this sample, and the favorites have won 76%. And 76% is a lot more than 65%. One way to think about this is 65% is slightly worse than winning 2 for every 1 you lose, while 76% is slightly better than winning 3 for every 1 you lose. And if that doesn't sound like that big a difference, then let me say that averaging 3-1 is averaging a tournament quarterfinals, and averaging 2-1 is averaging not making an icon. That's a pretty big gap. So 76% is a lot more than 65%. And this is the bucket where I think this has performed the worst. However, if we make the kind of 400 to 600 point adjustment, then the expectation rather than 65% probably ends up being maybe a touch over 70, and 76% isn't that far off. I would also suggest that in more recent events, though I didn't mathematically check this, in more recent events, results have been closer to the expected, so ratings have been catching up to where it's supposed to be. But in that 60 to 70% range, I think it is underrating how much ahead favorites are by some amount. In the 70 to 80% range, so we're expecting around a 75% win rate. Again, adjusted, we might be expecting more like an 80 or a little over 80% win rate. The favorites in 68 games scored 85%. So again, favorites are overperforming. And then we reach, and this is a smaller sample, we're down to 40 games, in the 80 to 90% section, so we'd expect around 85%, maybe adjusted closer to 90. Favorites have only won 87.8%. So this is the first time that favorites aren't really overperforming. And then lastly, in the 90 to 100% range, favorites have won 100% over just 16 games. So small sample, but looks basically like, yeah, if it says there's just an enormous favorite, there is. But weirdly, the 70 to 80 and the 80 to 90 buckets, very similar, 85.3 versus 87.8. Smallish samples. Overall, I think this is pretty good. I think like slight favorites are probably a little bigger favorites than it thinks, but again, that might have just been my rating screw up, and it might be basically just getting those right. Then the kind of moderate favorites, it gets a bit wrong, but by the time we get to big favorites, I think it's pretty much back on track. And I think looks like a pretty decent estimation system. And so that was the first thing I did, and I recorded a really badly done video on that and then deleted it because I wanted to re-record, but I decided I wanted to do another check. I wanted to take every chat tournament run and calculate the odds of each player winning, and then putting those odds into buckets, right? So if there's a tournament of, 4 players and one has 50%, one has 20%, one is 20, say one is 50, one is 30, one is 20, one is 0, right? I could then put those into buckets, right? And see if over time, the players I think should win 30% of tournaments actually do win 30% of tournaments. I wanted to see not just if this could predict individual matchups well, but if it did a good job of predicting tournament winners. And of course, most tournaments, if it says the favorite in a 16-player tournament might be like 25% to win, and second most likely is 17, and third most likely is 14, lots of times the top favorite won't win, right? 3 out of 4 times they shouldn't. The question when it's predicting is not, does the person it thinks is most likely to win actually win? Because if it only thinks they're 25% to win, that's not a remotely good check if it's predicting things well. It's, do the people it thinks win 25% actually win 25%? Do the people it thinks win 7% actually win 7%? And if it's in the vicinity, then I think it's a pretty good system. If it's not in the vicinity, then it is, of course, not a good system. So I made some buckets. I took 0 to 5%, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, 15 to 20, 20 to 25, and because above that, the 5% sections had really, really small buckets, 25% plus. Now, some of these buckets are small. 2 of the buckets are around 10, sample size. But I think that the results are still worth talking about. Our 0 to 5% bucket had by far the biggest sample size with over 100 players put in it. Others were smaller. In our 0 to 5% section, 1 out of 119 players won a tournament that it estimated at under 5%. Now, we might say under 5%, 0 to 5%, that averages 2.5. We should expect 2.5%. We should actually expect much lower, because a lot of the times it was estimating people at like 0.3 or 0.6 or 1% to win a tournament, and most of the people in this section, it was estimating at 2% or less to win the event. In actuality, the event was won at 0.84%, and I think this is pretty good. I think this is right around what it expected given the what it was assigning the individuals as probability. I think this is about right, and also follows that, generally speaking, it has been somewhat underestimating the advantage favorites have and somewhat overestimating underdogs. So here, underdogs' actual performance is a little worse. Maybe it expected 1.5% from this group, and actually it's 0.8%. a slight underperformance makes sense because I think it is slightly overrating this group. In the next group, estimated 5 to 10% to win, we have a sample of 30 players. And so we might expect, again, there's a sort of normal distribution to this, so maybe we'd expect 6 or 7% to have won. In actuality, only 1 out of the 30 is won, 3.33%. Now, if one more had won, that would jump up to 6.66%. When we're dealing with samples where a difference between 1 or 2 successes or 0 or 1 successes is just a huge difference, it's hard to take very strong conclusions from those numbers because the sample just clearly isn't big enough, right? If you think something is an event that's like 3% to happen and you take 50 samples, if it happens 3 times, if it happens 0 times, those are both easy results to have happen, and you get kind of wildly different numbers. You need really big samples when dealing with things so close to 0 or so close to 100% to actually be able to differentiate them. So this one I think is fine. Again, it looks like it is slightly overestimating the weaker end of players, but all in all, this number is well within kind of the range. 10 to 15% have won 4 out of 11, have won 36% of the time. I think this is just a small sample effect, because if we go up to the 15 to 20% range, they've won 2 out of 14 or 14% of the time. So you have something where it looks like people in the 10 to 15% range are massively outperforming 15 to 20%, but it's really small samples. And if we just joined them into the same group, they would have won 6 out of 25, which is just under 25%, which means they are definitely overperforming. But I wouldn't think that you really want to be at 12% to win a tournament rather than 18%, because that happens to have won more so far. I think it's one of those, this group is overperforming, but somewhere within range. Similarly, the 20 to 25% group has won 3 out of 8. Small sample, but again, overperforming. And the 25% plus group has actually underperformed a bit. They're they've won 4 out of 14 or 29%, 28.5%, which is a little underperforming, given that some of them were, 35, 40% favorites. So overall, I think it is getting, it has the same issue. It is underestimating the top of the field, who are winning at a somewhat higher rate than it thinks they will. The people in the 10 to 30% range are winning more like 25% of the tournaments than like 15%. And the people in the 0 to 10% range are winning a little less than it thinks they should. So again, we're seeing an effect where the favorites are better than this thinks they're going to be. The favorites are outperforming what this rating system thinks they'll do. But overall, it's still it's pretty close. I think these are pretty decent estimates. If I had made slightly bigger buckets, they'd probably look a little better. And overall, I feel pretty decent about the rating system as a predictor, especially once you adjust for the fact that my 400 to 600 point switch really messed this up a decent amount. It really caused, I think, a lot of the favorites versus underdogs gap being closer looking than it should be, because again, I just changed the width of the field and didn't change the numbers at all, right? So the numbers are from a narrower version of the math, and suddenly I widen the math, but the numbers take a while to adjust to that. And so, of course, the results it pops out will look narrower than the results of actuality. So overall, I think this is a pretty decent rating system, and I'm not really sure how I'm going to use it for things besides rankings and whatnot. But it seems to me that it has interesting application for potentially predicting events. I've set it up so you can put in any 16 players at any point in time so far and predict the odds of winning the next tournament. So for instance, there is currently the current weekly open. Let's bring that up. Which actually, will have ended many moons ago by the time you watch this, but is starring these two players we're seeing here. Turds and Delial are in the finals. I do not believe they've yet played it, but if I put in the field, it thinks that Akiyama. So the top half of the bracket was Doom Train versus Akiyama, Vialva versus Turds, and the bottom half was Yevon versus Dalamar, and Delial versus Tezuka. And the rating system thinks Akiyama is the best player in the field, but that Akiyama also has an easier bracket than, say, Delial does, who it thinks is the clear second best player in the field. Right? Delial has Tezuka in the first round, while Akiyama has Doom Train, and it thinks, Doom Train is a good player and Tezuka is an excellent player. So it thinks Delial has the tougher road, and thus it thinks Akiyama has a 44% chance to take down the tournament, Delial second at 24%, Turds third at 12%, Yevon fourth at 8%. It thinks Tezuka is a little stronger than Yevon, but Tezuka has Delial round one. So it thinks Yevon is fourth favorite, Tezuka is fifth favorite, and it thinks those five are strong enough that the remaining players, even though Vialva, Doom Train, and Dalamar are good players, all have pretty negligible chances to win. And as it happened, Doom Train did lose to Akiyama, Vialva did lose to Turds, Dalamar did lose to Yevon. All three underdogs went out early. And our finals, Turds managed to beat Akiyama, so our finals is Delial versus Turds. But I think this, there's a lot of data points you could look to. Wow, this is a weird set. I didn't actually look what the random was, but suddenly I saw level 10. All right, it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Yep, makes sense. But you see results like that, where there's a favorite who's a pretty big favorite by its system, and Akiyama's been winning a lot of tournaments recently, as he seems to do. And, but some he's not going to win, and this one he didn't. And it's going to be Delial or Turds, the second or third favorites. Yeah, I think it's a pretty decent system. So I will be thinking about ways to apply it interestingly. I think a betting type thing would probably not be great. It would probably just end up with some people feeling bad. Though I also think it's really cool. We have, as I said, there was one event where a person, it assigned odds under 5% won the tournament. And let's see if I can... It was actually a very recent event. One sec. Gotta tell it exactly what I want because it gets confused. It was an 8-player tournament. And there was a very strong bracket, right? The 8-player tournaments have not been easy to win because they have been loaded with really elite players. So the 4 highest rated in the field were myself, Akiyama, Delial, and Turds. And Vialva beat Sachi, then beat Akiyama, and then beat Delial in the finals to take down a tournament it thought he had 2.5% chance to win. Now, I think Vialva's been playing really well recently, and Vialva has certainly, he had a good tournament leading into this, and this one he won in great fashion, and I think he's been playing really well. But it was preceded by him taking a break after having some really poor results. And so his rating was quite low, as happens. And this is the only really big upset tournament we've had where someone who it thought was big underdog took down a really tough field. And it was a really impressive run. Yeah, I guess that's all I've got to say. I'm probably just going to start repeating myself. But I think overall, the ratings are doing pretty well, and I expect the further forward we go in time, the better they will do as the numbers adjust to the ridiculous change in the rating system I made. And I like that I've set up a spreadsheet such that I can put in 16 players or 8 players, tell it what point in time I want. I haven't set it up yet to be able to do 32 or 64, and it can't handle 3-way finals. So I haven't figured that part out yet, but it would be pretty easy to get it up to 32. And yeah, I can put in 16 players, I can put in a bracket, and I can pop out odds of winning. And they're pretty decent. And generally speaking, it should probably be understood as underestimating the favorites a little. Though the people it thinks are huge favorites, the people it thinks are like 40% plus, have not done all that well. So it seems to really, the people it's underestimating are maybe not the very top, but the second tier. And what happened? Tie. Cool. Hopefully they play their finals game. Excited for that one. And hopefully this was interesting. Overall, ratings do pretty decent predictions. And maybe I will figure out some kind of betting pool sometime. I do think it's like, maybe feels bad to go like Delial 3-1 to win. Insert other person here 50-1 to win, right? But I don't know, could be fun. Probably won't do that, but could be fun. And you know, if you had placed a bet on Vialva here and got 50-1, you'd feel pretty good about yourself that you had found a nice edge against the bookie. But of course, this is what bookies always do. They try to sucker you into betting the unlikely people, when really the way to clean up is just bet on Akiyama every tournament. So, all right, cheers.